welcome to my presentation in the hypertension in the African American community. Thank you so much for joining me. As an overview, we know that high blood pressure for Blacks and African Americans is quite common in America. Many African Americans are prescribed medications for high blood pressure regulation. Medications may often be changed due to clients' eating habits or their sedentary lifestyle. One major problem that African Americans face today is that 41% of African Americans have high blood pressure, compared to the 27% of their Caucasian counterparts. By changing the way one approaches to their diet, they can dramatically change the impact that high blood pressure can have on their health. It is a fact that fried chicken is not completely bad for one's health, yet everything must be given in moderation. Patients can make incremental changes by eliminating one high-risk food at a time. They should identify the amount of calories in each food as a basic principle to altering their diet as an initial step. The typical diet of African American families are fried chicken, macaroni and cheese, sweet tea, for some examples. These tend to play a larger role in Southern diets, and they're associated with high blood pressure. This is because Southern food tends to be high in saturated fats, salts, and added sugar, which are all risk factors for hypertension. They are also risk factors for heart disease, stroke, vision problems, and kidney diseases. This is how nursing informatics can help. By keeping a closer eye on what a patient consumes, we can better manage their diet by inspecting their electronic health record and advocating for a healthier lifestyle, as opposed to offering newer and newer medications to see which ones Blacks and African Americans may respond better towards. Referencing Article 1, an observational relationship can be identified by the amount of aldosterone concentration in African Americans and their chronic hypertensive symptoms. Blacks excrete sodium from their bodies at a slower rate than do whites. We know from our science class that salt follows a gradient, that water follows a gradient, and water follows salt. So, where there's salt, there's water. Where there is, due to the osmotic pressure and the attraction of the ions. But in layman's terms, anything that contains salt is going to draw water into it. So, by consuming large amounts of salt, you'll increase the amount of water. By increasing the amount of water, you increase your volume. And the correspondent to increasing high blood pressure is increasing one's volume. So by increasing your diet in salt, you're increasing your volume, which in turn increases your blood pressure. This is explained as the article goes on to say that lack of sodium excretion begins to occur at a young age, prompting the body to retain fluid via the renin-aldosterone mechanism. Water volume builds up in the blood vessels of African American people and essentially raises their blood pressure, previously stated. Goes on to say that only an estimated 6% of inherent African genetics have been studied, meaning therefore the exact causation as to why African Americans are so much more likely to develop hypertension is largely unknown. There is some speculation regarding this, however. The prevalence of hypertension within the African American population is about 45%. And as we'll see in our next slide, there is some research behind the genetics which may serve as implications for that as well. Other factors play a role in hypertensive status as well, including lack of elasticity in blood vessels, again leading to high blood pressure, while essentially hypertensive generally is 50% due to genetics. Article 2 goes on to say that researchers have discovered that many genes have been discovered in Blacks and African Americans that directly causes them to have unstable blood pressure due to alterations in their genetic expression. This is expressed in the article Zilberman, 2019. Many African Americans may have a gene which causes the constriction of blood vessels, leading to chronic hypertension, as they lack the elasticity that other races have. This increased pressure can prove detrimental to one's health, particularly when they've been already dealt the cards of disenfranchisement. As we know, there's a direct correlation between high blood pressure, heart failure, and kidney impairments. By having chronic high blood pressure, it can impair one's health dramatically. Between these two articles, we've discovered that there may not only be strong lifestyle implications that what we consume directly affects our blood pressure, not only as African Americans, but as Americans as a community as a whole, but particularly for African Americans. There may be further evidence that suggests that they may have genetic implicating factors that affects them on a physiological level, which affects the expression of their genes, which affects the way that their blood vessels respond when volume is placed in their environment, as opposed to other races. Not only are they increasing the concentration in their blood vessels by consuming high amounts of salt and therefore retaining more water, but also their blood vessels are naturally lack the elasticity naturally, as other races do, genetically speaking. This is due to genetic factors. So they face a double entendre of problems in this aspect, increasing their volume and not having the resilience to combat it. This places them at a disadvantage, therefore disenfranchisement, to summarize. There are some recommendations that, again, we have previously stated to ameliorate these issues that African Americans can face. As previously stated, we highlighted some of their key issues is the consumption of foods which African Americans take on a daily basis. Now, we can't go and alter one's genetics, but something that we can do is we can alter what they consume on a day-to-day basis. So again, this is a problem that many African Americans face. Many Americans are obese. Many of them have diabetes. Many of them have heart disease. But by taking these considerations in conjunction that peoples of African or Black descent have an additional arterial challenge to face from within, it could be proved more difficult, because not only do they have these deep diets instilled within them, they're also not as responsive to medication because of the genetic factors. Still, again, as previously mentioned at the introduction of this slide, even adjusting an individual's diet by just one food choice option at a time, it could have extraordinary benefits to one's livelihood. So, in conclusion, these findings provoke even greater concern for peoples of color, of course. Going about day-to-day life can be enough of a challenge for people without having a strong support system, as most people of color tend to come from an economically disadvantaged background. So healthy foods may not be an option. A sedentary lifestyle may be more likely. The burden of having to work full-time while simultaneously maintaining a healthy diet and lifestyle is not always easily applicable to each person, given the economy we live in. However, again, that's why we try to offer the most viable intervention that we can, and that is, don't try to do everything all at once. Take it in strides, and one step at a time, just as we take one day at a time. Adjusting your diet one food group at a time could have some dramatic benefits. That we conclude. References are Nana El Glavi, Education, Genetic Ancestry, Relique from the Mayo, and again, relic A.